his second talk.
Well, that was a bit delayed. Comparative advantage, right? So I was told that over the break, gentlemen were in the restroom exercising both level 1 and level 4 happiness. So that was quite humorous. All right, so as we're coming in to sit down, we're going to go ahead and get started. So my second presentation is forming men as guardians of faith. David tells his son in 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 2 through 3, "Be strong, be a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God." The question I want to ask and pose at the beginning of this presentation is, what is the charge of the Lord for us as men? Well, gentlemen, I suggest to you that this charge of the Lord that's essential to our role as being level 4 men is to be a protector, to be a guardian, to be a defender. That, I suggest to you, is the charge of the Lord. Now, you probably are thinking, well, Karlo, tell us something we don't already know, man. It's kind of like the men's conference mantra, right? Be the protector, be the guardian, be the defender. Rightfully so. However, perhaps you've never been told the reason why we're called to be a protector, a guardian, or a defender. And perhaps you've never been told what you're to guard against. Particularly, what I'm going to suggest we're called to guard against, and what we are to guard, to defend and protect. Namely, the mind. I'm going to suggest to you today, I want to emphasize, there are many things that we're called to guard and protect. But I want to emphasize today for you, gentlemen, that the charge of the Lord is for us to guard the mind. I'm convinced that the greatest threat to the gift of faith is the war that the evil one is waging on the mind, on the intellect. Because as St. Thomas Aquinas teaches, the will follows the intellect. We can only choose that which the intellect presents to the will as a good, because the will is necessarily ordered toward the good. It's the very fabric of our being as rational animals. So Satan knows that if he can get the mind, he can get to the heart. And if he can get to the heart, then he can snuff out that flame of faith. As Dr. Peter Craft once eloquently put it, the intellect is the gateway to the heart. So in this presentation, I want to do 3 things. First, I want to establish our primordial vocation as men to be guardians, defenders, and protectors. And we're going to establish that primordial vocation by looking at it through the natural light of human reason, by reason alone, and then also in light of divine revelation from the book of Genesis and the creation of Adam in the garden. Secondly, I want to establish our primordial vocation as defenders today within current culture, and identify the intellectual assaults that we need to be guarding against. Not only our own minds and hearts, but also the minds of our loved ones, our wives, our children. And then finally, in section 3 of this presentation, I want to wet your whistle a little bit and give you a little taste of how we as guardians can confront head-on these intellectual assaults and how we can overcome them, refute them, and thus protect and guard and defend the minds of our loved ones, and thus ultimately the hearts of our loved ones, and the gift of faith that lies within. Amen? Amen. So let's zero in on this aspect of level 4 manhood. First, the primordial vocation of man to be a defender, a guardian, a protector. Why is this the case? Well, let's look at it from the natural light of human reason. In classical natural law theory, the man is ordained by nature to be the protector and the provider of the family. We see this within the course of nature when wife or woman becomes pregnant with child. Woman and child are vulnerable. Woman has a hard time providing for herself and for her child, given the nature of the development of the child within the womb. She is vulnerable to attacks within her condition. So nature ordains the man, the father, as the protector and the provider of the family. He cooperated and he participated in making, right? But man is not only, the father is not only ordained by nature to provide for the physical needs of his wife and child, but also for the spiritual needs of his wife and child. Because remember, as human beings, we are rational animals. So we have certain bodily or physical needs, but we also have spiritual needs. So the Father is ordained by nature to do what St. Thomas Aquinas said, to train the soul. He must provide in the training of the soul. That is to say, man is ordained by nature, the man is ordained by nature to provide truth for the intellect of his wife and child, to guide and lead them in the truth, to direct the will of his wife and child toward the good, and conducting human behavior in a way that's consistent with human flourishing, given the kind of beings that we are, namely human beings. So the husband, the father, is not only provider of the physical needs, he is provider of the spiritual needs as well. And then ultimately, because the mind, the intellect, and the will is ordered toward God himself, by nature, we don't need a Bible to tell us this. We can know this by the natural light of human reason, through philosophical analysis of the human being, that the Father by nature is ordained to order his family to God. That's nothing new under the sun. Jesus simply comes and gives us the power to do it, amen? And shows us the beauty of that ultimate end in a way that we can't know by reason alone. So we have this primordial vocation as men, by nature, to be the head of the family and to provide for the physical and spiritual needs of the family. But with that comes also to protect the family, to protect the physical and spiritual goods of the family. So the father is not only called to form the heart, mind, and body of the family, but also to protect from malformation. And His Excellency knows a lot about that in sending his men, his seminarians, to good seminaries for proper formation. Amen, Father? But also to protect from malformation, because there's some pretty kooky seminaries out there that are causing a lot of damage in the church, unfortunately. But His Excellency here in the Diocese of Bismarck is doing what he can to rectify that. Amen? Amen. primordial vocation of man to be a defender, guardian, or protector in the light of divine revelation. When we look to the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, when God creates Adam and he puts him in the garden, God says to Adam, or the scripture says, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. To till and to keep. Now, does this mean that God made Adam to be a gardener? And to put some nice pretty flowers in the Garden of Eden? And to till? Perhaps. But I think there's something more to it than that, gentlemen. Because the Hebrew word for till, actually, the Hebrew word for keep, when it says to till and to keep, the Hebrew word is shamar, which literally means to guard. So one could translate that as God took Adam, put him in the garden to guard the garden. We actually see this word shamar used in 2 Chronicles chapter 23, verse 19, in reference to the gatekeeper who was to guard the house of the Lord from anyone entering in the house of the Lord and profaning it. This is where ushers come in. This is the origin of ushers. Because if anybody was to come into the house of the Lord, that gatekeeper was meant to usher them out. So any ushers in the house today, now you have a different perspective of your role at church, right? Hey boy, take that gum out your mouth. Hey girl, go back home, put the clothes down. I'm sure Father might want to say that sometimes, but hey, we minister as we can. All right. Now, the command to guard the garden implies a threat, right? I mean, if you got a command to guard, then apparently you're guarding against something. And we all know the narrative that the threat was the devil himself. But what's interesting is Adam fails to guard the garden. Because we all know the story. Does Satan end up in the garden? Yes. So in some way, Adam fails in his manly vocation to be guardian, to guard the garden. Satan enters into the garden, and he goes directly to the woman. Because you know what? Satan knows how much power those women have over us men. Amen? He knows that when Adam saw Eve for the first time, when God created her, he said, "Whoa, man!" Now, I must say, I wish I came up with that, but I stole that from other speakers, all right? So that's not my idea. But Satan knew how powerful Eve is relative to the man. So he makes a beeline to Eve. And notice, Satan immediately enters into a dialogue with Eve. Satan suggests to Eve that, and he begins to sow the seeds of doubt in three ways. He suggests to Eve that God's command is arbitrary. Did God say you can't eat of any tree in the garden? In other words, God picked this tree and not those trees. Doesn't that sound a bit arbitrary to you? There's no rationale or reason behind God's commands. It's optimism, nominalism. William of Ockham, right? Where God's command reigns supreme. And he could command you to commit murder. This is sort of implicit in that. God's command is arbitrary. No rhyme or reason to God's command. He then suggests that God is a liar. Surely you won't die, when God told them they would die. And finally, he suggests that God is jealous and hoarding his power, keeping all of the power to himself. God knows you will be like him, knowing good and evil, Satan says. Notice what Satan is doing here, gentlemen. Satan is attacking Eve's mind. He's sowing the seeds of doubt in her mind, painting a false picture of God. As one professor once said, he's painting the noble daddy. No, Daddy, what are you talking about? Because it ain't nobody's God. The God that Satan pictures or paints for Eve is not the authentic God. It's not the real, true God. So notice, in order to get to her heart, he enters through the gate of the intellect. And we all know the story. Eve would eventually conceive and eat of the fruit and go contrary to God's command. And what's interesting for us as men is that the text seems to suggest Adam was there the entire time. According to Genesis 3:6, we read, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, and he ate." Wait a minute. I thought Adam, as we'd say in Louisiana, I thought Adam was freaking over there. That is, he was kind of doing his own thing, right? He was trimming trees or picking fruit from some other tree. No, according to the text, it seems to suggest that Adam was there the entire time while this dialogue was going on. When Satan was planting the seeds of the seed. Satan's a pretty good farmer as well. Satan knows how to plant seeds as well. But it's not the good seeds. It's the bad ones. So as he's planting, now come on guys, you're supposed to be farmers in here, right? Isn't that true? I'm not a farmer, so I can't quite relate to that. But you guys work the land from what I'm told. So while Satan is dialoguing with Eve, Adam's there the whole time. So, gentlemen, not only does Adam fail in his vocation to guard the garden at first and say, "Thou shalt not pass." Get out of here, Satan. He lets him in, and he gets into the dialogue. Adam's there the whole time while the dialogue's taking place, and he's silent. He's neutral. He doesn't want to flutter any feathers. He doesn't want to rock the boat. He doesn't want to lay down his life. He doesn't want to sacrifice. He doesn't want to be a level 4 man. And he allows Satan to get to the heart of his bride because he failed to guard her mind. He failed to guard the garden. So we see in light of divine revelation that as men we have a primordial vocation to guard the garden. And I would suggest to guard the mind and the hearts of our loved ones. Unlike Adam, who failed to guard the garden, Jesus Christ comes, gentlemen, and shows us how to guard the garden. Jesus comes to rectify what Adam messed up. He's making right what Adam wrong. The first man failed to give us the example of what it means to be a man, to be a protector, a guardian, a defender. So the second man, the new man, the man of all men, Jesus Christ, the new Adam, comes to give us the example of what it means to be a man, a level 4 man. And he lays down his life. He comes to teach the truth. As he told Pontius Pilate in John 18:37, I come to testify to the truth. Because the first Adam didn't do it. The new Adam comes to do it. And then he lays down his life in self-sacrificial love in order to show us men how we are called to love and how we are called to guard. The first Adam didn't lay down his life to guard the garden and protect his bride Eve from the threat of the evil one. But the new Adam, Jesus, lays down his life to guard his bride, the church, from the threat of the evil one, Satan himself, who prowls around looking for a soul to devour, as St. Peter writes in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8 through 9. So we have this primordial vocation to be a defender, to be a guardian. We see it in light of the natural light of human reason, by nature, and we also see it in the divine light, by divine revelation. Now, gentlemen, Satan is knocking on the door of our garden. He's knocking on the door of the garden of our soul, the garden in Luke chapter 22, verse 31, Satan demands to sift you like wheat, to pluck you out the field. And like it was in the beginning, Satan has a resolve to pluck us out of the field, to sift us like wheat, by waging war on the intellect, sowing doubt within the mind in order to lead the heart astray. And there's evidence of this. Several studies have been conducted over the past few years showing that Christians are leaving Christianity by the droves, especially young adults. For example, the 2014 Religious Landscape Study by the Pew Research Center showed that adults ages 18 and older who describe themselves as Christians dropped by nearly 8% in just 7 years. Numbers that they've never seen before, from 78.4% in 2007 to 70.6% in 2014. A nearly 8% drop in those 18 and older professing to be Christians. Over the same period, from 2007 to 2014, the percentage of Americans who are religiously unaffiliated, that is to say, they're either atheist, agnostic, or not belonging to any particular religion, that group of Americans jumped more than 6 points from 16.1% to 22.8%. And the 7% gain, according to the Pew Research, Research Center, represents about 20 million people, which is more than 5 times higher than the gain of any other group. Catholic, Protestant, atheism itself, or agnosticism itself. So we see that young adults, in particular, these adults within America, are leaving Christianity. This sort of non-affiliation within secularism is increasing. Another example is the 2014 Barna study. The Barna Research Group found that only 2 in 10 Americans under 30 believe attending church is important, an all-time low. That's 80% of those under 30 that don't think church is important. 59% of millennials, ages 22 to 35 is how they're defining it. 59% of millennials raised in a church have dropped out. And 35% of these millennials actually have an anti-church stance. That is to say, they are vehemently opposed to religion. And finally, the San Diego State University released a study in 2015 that stated millennials are the least religious generation of the last 6 decades, and possibly in the nation's history. So what is the cause of this massive exodus away from Christianity? Well, fundamentally, gentlemen, these young adults, these millennials, do not see the belief in God and Christianity as true. That's the bottom line. Because if they saw belief in God and in Christianity as true, they wouldn't be leaving it. They wouldn't be rejecting those beliefs. These young adults who want to be intellectually credible, intellectually sophisticated, they don't want to get laughed out of the academic community. These young adults who want to be intellectually responsible do not see Christianity as a viable option. Instead, they see it as nothing but pie-in-the-sky type stuff. They see it as nothing but a figment of the imagination. Nothing more than Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. And since I want to be intellectually responsible, I need to reject this God religious stuff because that's not real knowledge anyway, and I need to embrace real knowledge, which is only obtained through scientific endeavors. So why is it that these young adults do not see Christianity as a viable option? Why don't they see it as intellectually credible or responsible? Well, I think we can illustrate this with a narrative that might hit home for some of you fathers. Catholics, a good old Catholic dad, a Catholic dad's little Catholic girl, Susie, is going off to college. For the first time, she just graduated high school. She's going to a new university. Now, mind you, this little Catholic girl, Susie, has been going to Catholic school from K through 12. She was in campus ministry, man. She was praising Jesus and praise and worship, right? Singing all the praise and worship songs. Good Catholic girl. Daddy sends her off to college. Unfortunately, it's a secular university. Couldn't send her to a Catholic university. She chose the secular university. So she's in her history class, right? And she doesn't come home the first weekend. She's got to wait a couple of weeks before she goes home, right? But she's in history class, and the history professor, right off the bat, begins to make digs at Christianity. And proceeds to tell the students that we don't really know if Jesus ever existed. He probably didn't. And even if he did exist, we can't really trust those New Testament documents in the Bible, these early Christians, and what they tell us about what Jesus did and said, because they were written hundreds of years later. And plus, they were biased as Christians, so they probably fudged a lot of the material that they're writing about in order to promote their agenda as Christians, in order to bring in converts to the Christian religion. So all of these New Testament documents that Christians wrote many years ago, we can't really trust them. So this whole Christian project can't even get off the ground because their fundamental documents are untrustworthy. 2 weeks go by of this history professor's class, and little Susie goes home and sitting at the dinner table as good Catholic families do, right? And Susie's mom, she's kind of charismatic. So she's always talking about Jesus. Jesus this and Jesus that. So they're sitting at the dinner table and, mom is talking about her day and things that are happening. They're exchanging conversation and what's been happening in their lives. And mama just blurts out with something good that happened. Praise Jesus, right? Thank you, Jesus. To which and then mom proceeds to say, oh yeah, speaking of Jesus, Susie, you're coming to Mass with us Sunday, right? Well, Mom, I don't really buy that whole Jesus thing anymore. Mom, my history professor, who has a PhD, mind you, and I don't have anything against PhDs, guys. I'm going to pursue one myself in philosophy or theology. But Susie says, Mom, he has a PhD, and my history professor said that we really don't know definitively if Jesus existed, because there's really no non-Christian sources that confirm his existence, and those Christians, they were biased, and their documents were hundreds of years written after the events of Jesus' life, so we really don't know much about Jesus. So we can't really trust him, so Christianity Project fails. Mama's heart is pounding. Mama's freaking out. Well, do you at least believe in God? Oh yeah, Mom, don't worry about that. I still believe in God, and I can be a good person and following God and knowing God on the natural light of human reason. I just don't need the Jesus thing. So Susie goes back to college. And she is now in her physics class. And she's got this brilliant physicist, right? Brilliant scientist. And so this scientist starts to pontificate on matters of philosophy and epistemology, the study of wisdom, the study of knowledge. And the scientist proceeds to say, well, students, that this whole God thing and belief in God and religious knowledge, that's not real knowledge. In this class, we obtain real knowledge. So all that religious stuff that your mommy and your daddy ever taught you, leave it out the door. Because that's just figments of the imagination, constructs of the mind. Real knowledge is obtained through scientific inquiry. Only science is a rational form of inquiry, because only science gives us real knowledge about the real world. All of this faith stuff is merely subjective, not objective, independent of what figment of the imagination, and thus something to be rejected if you want to be intellectually responsible. Susie's freaking out. Oh God, I gotta go home this weekend. What is Mom gonna say? I can't believe this God stuff because I want to be intellectually responsible. I want to be sophisticated. Did y'all catch that? I'm from Louisiana, you know, I call funny sometimes. Not quite as funny as swamp people. It's not that bad. So Susie goes home, they're at the family dinner table. And so they're in conversation, and all of a sudden Mom blurts out, "Praise God," as a good charismatic Catholic mom she is. And Susie says, "Oh, speaking of God, Mom, you know, I learned something very interesting in my physics class. My very smart science professor instructed us that all that religious knowledge stuff about God is just a pure figment of the imagination because it's only subjective knowledge, it's not real knowledge. It doesn't give us real knowledge about the objective world. Only science does that." And, you know, I mean, Mom, since, we want to be intellectually responsible, you know, so I can't really do the whole God thing anymore. I'm embracing science. That's real knowledge. Mom's heart's pounding. Oh my goodness gracious, what is happening? Susie goes back to college, and finally she's in her philosophy class. Once again, another PhD professor, and he begins to inform his students that there is no such thing as absolute truth. There is no truth independent of what an individual or group of individuals think, for truth is merely relative to what the individual or the group of individuals think. I mean, Susie, right there in the front row, Susie, think about it. How can there be any absolute truth when so many people believe so many different things? There cannot possibly be any absolute truth. If there were absolute truth, everybody would know it, right, Susie? I don't know, Professor. And all of a sudden, there goes truth for Susie. She goes back home in conversation at the dinner table with Mom and Dad, and she informs her parents that she no longer even believes in truth. Because the issue of sexuality comes up. Mama blurts out, "Did you hear about that girl that we used to know? Remember that girl you used to go to school with, Susie? She's now a publicly professed lesbian living the homosexual lifestyle. We need to pray for her." "Oh, well, you know, Mom, there really is no such thing as absolute truth. And if there's no such thing as absolute truth, then there's no such thing as absolute moral truth. And we can determine truth for ourselves, so it's really okay. Because we can determine who we want to marry, whether male or female. We can determine whatever gender we want to be, male or female, and whatever that means in our current culture, right? Because truth is relative. So we determine truth for ourselves. So Mom, don't be so harsh on our friend there. You see the point? What do we have here? We have a little good Catholic girl, Susie, who wasn't equipped to face the intellectual assaults. And now, she no longer believes in Jesus, no longer believes in God, no longer believes in truth. No truth, no God, no Jesus. Satan has snuffed out that light or that flame. Now granted, we know the pilot light's still on theologically from the sacrament of baptism, but he's definitely squashed it and is not letting it burn bright. So what can we do as fathers to, as one speaking Alex Jones used to say, fan the flame? What can we do to fan that flame of faith, to ignite it once again? What are we going to do about this intellectual assault that Satan is waging against our loved ones? Well, my dear brothers, we need to build a resistance. We need to resist Satan firm in faith, as St. Peter writes in 1 Peter 5:9. We need to do, as St. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, destroy all arguments and every proud obstacle to the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. That's what we have to do. We have to engage the fight, gentlemen, on the intellectual front. And I don't care if you ain't got a master's degree in philosophy, or a master's degree in theology, or a PhD. We are all called, by virtue of our baptism and our confirmation, by virtue of being men, to wage war against the evil one on the intellectual front. To be the guardians of the mind, and thus guardians of the heart, and thus guardians of faith that we are called to be. To do what St. Peter writes in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, always be ready to give a defense to anyone that asks you a reason for the explanation that is within you. A defense of our Christian hope. We are all called in some way to be apologists. That word, which comes from the Greek word apologia, which St. Peter uses in 1 Peter 3:15, when he says, give a defense, give an answer. Apologia, an intellectual answer to persuade another of one's position of belief. That is what we are called to do as guardians of faith. So the question is how? How do we engage this war on the intellectual front? Well, I'm going to give you a little taste. All right? I want to introduce you to how we would go about, very briefly, how we would go about responding to these three intellectual assaults. Relativism. There is no absolute truth. Truth is relative to what you or I believe and what you or I think. Scientism. Well, that religious knowledge of God is just subjective knowledge. It's not real knowledge, because only science can give us real knowledge, because only science is the only form of rational inquiry, which is the foundation of modern atheism, what is called scientism. And in Christian skepticism, well, we really don't know if Jesus ever existed, and we can't really trust those New Testament documents and what the Christians said about Jesus, because they were written hundreds of years after what Jesus said and did, and they were Christian and probably biased, and there's really no non-Christian sources to affirm that Jesus ever existed. How do we respond? Well, let's take relativism first. Recall, relativism is a philosophical worldview that states there is no truth independent of what you or I think. Truth is relative to one system of belief. So a belief is going to be true if it coheres with my system of beliefs, right? So it's relative to me. It doesn't conform to what's true out there. No absolute truth, which is the foundation and leads to the various cultural problems we're facing today with homosexuality, transgenderism, etc. So how do we respond to relativism? Well, one way is to show how it's self-refuting. Okay, brother, you say there's no absolute truth. Well, is that absolutely true? See? For any philosopher gurus out here, to get your philosophy geek on, anytime you use the verb to be, the is, in philosophy that's the second act of the mind. It's called judgment. It's where truth lies, when we make a judgment about reality. Father is a human being, you see? So inasmuch as a relativist says there is no absolute truth, that translates into the following. It's absolutely true that there is no absolute truth. And brothers, you laugh at that and you go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, right? And the reason why it doesn't make sense is because it violates the fundamental principle of all human knowledge, namely the principle of non-contradiction, which states something cannot be and not be in the same respect at the same place and time. Brother, you can't be sitting and not sitting in the same respect at the same place and time. Amen? Now, you have the potential to not be sitting, but in as much as you are sitting, you can't be not sitting. Follow that? Some philosophy 101 for you, right? To say it's absolutely true that there is no absolute truth violates the principle of non-contradiction. Thus, it's self-refuting, it's incoherent. So this whole philosophical worldview of, there's no kind of relative, just relative to what you think or what your culture thinks, etc. Well, that statement in and of itself is a claim about objective reality. It transcends the statement, there is no absolute truth, transcends what you or I think, or what a group of us thinks, or what that group thinks. So relativism is incoherent. Objective truth does exist. Now, the philosophy professor was saying, well, Susie, people believe so many different things. How in the world can there be absolute truth? How do we respond to that? Well, listen, guys, just because people disagree about something, it doesn't follow there's no objective truth about the matter, right? I mean, we may be driving down a long desert road in Arizona, 125 degrees. I'm going to see water, and I'm thirsty, and we ain't drank anything for a long time. I see water, Bishop sees a mirage. I say, Your Excellency, there's water down the road. Hallelujah, praise Jesus, right? His Excellency says, Karlo, you're stupid. You're wrong. That's not water, bro. That's a mirage. Now, we have a disagreement. Just because we disagree doesn't necessarily follow from that disagreement that there's no objective truth about the matter. Of course not, right? So just because people disagree about things doesn't mean there is no absolute truth. So that's just a little taste of how you can respond to relativism. Little shameless plug here. If you're interested in getting more on the matter, you can go to shop.catholic.com. I actually have a CD, Your Truth, My Truth, How to Understand and Refute Relativistic Thinking. And in that CD, when you purchase the CD, which is about a 7-minute lecture, you can actually download the 38-page ebook or a study guide that goes with the lecture, where I go through various arguments that relativists put forward to substantiate their position and show you how to expose its incoherence. So if you're interested in more about relativism, I would encourage you to get a hold of that. Unfortunately, I don't have that here because I'm pinch hitting today, right? We got Tim Stinkle stuff, which, by the way, you need to go and buy everything off the table because he's going to be a happy man. Next, well, what about the physicist professor who said that knowledge about God and religious knowledge is just subjective knowledge and it's not real knowledge? And thus, God should be pushed into the corner and belong to all of those other things that are pure constructs of the imagination, like Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, etc. How do we respond to this view of scientism? Now, granted, notice, in my response, I am in no way devaluing the importance of scientific endeavors. I simply want to show how this scientistic worldview is flawed. The way in which we can respond is, once again, like for relativism, show how scientism is self-refuting. To use the fancy schmancy terminology from seminary days, Father, it's self-referentially incoherent, right? In other words, the one who posits scientism pulls the rug out from underneath his feet. How so? Because the belief itself that science alone gives us real knowledge cannot be the product of scientific inquiry. To say science is the only means by which we come to know what is real, the true value of that statement cannot be arrived at via science experimentation. It's a metaphysical claim. So fundamentally, it's not scientific knowledge. And if it's not scientific knowledge, according to scientism, it's not real knowledge. Consider the following syllogism. Whatever is not scientific knowledge is not real knowledge. The belief that scientific knowledge is not real knowledge is not scientific knowledge. Therefore, it's not real knowledge. Did you follow that? No. No? Thank you for being honest. Call it belief X. Belief X is whatever is not scientific knowledge is not real knowledge. Belief X is not scientific knowledge. Therefore, belief X is not real knowledge. In other words, atheistic worldview seeks to exalt science, but in so doing actually undermines it. Undermines its own position. It is self-refuting. By its own principle, it's not real knowledge, is another way to state it. In other words, it fails its own test. It constructs the test and then fails its own test. Scientism, which is the basis of modern atheism, is fundamentally flawed. The point being, gentlemen, that if we can show that scientism is flawed and self-referentially incoherent, thus self-refuting, unreasonable, well then there are other means by which we can come to know about reality. Science, as good as it is not the only form of rational inquiry. But there are other modes of coming to know about reality, other tools in the tool shed to use to come to knowledge about what is real, namely philosophy and also divine revelation. So, unfortunately, in our modern culture, many out there on the academic level are restricting their quest for knowledge to only within the boundaries of science and scientific inquiry. So it follows from that, gentlemen, of course they're not going to be able to detect or inquire about things that go beyond the boundaries of their discipline. And just because science is limited to only that which is physical, it doesn't follow from that which is non-physical doesn't exist. That would be like saying, well, you know, plastic cups don't exist on the beach in San Diego because my metal detector didn't detect the plastic cups. Just because the metal detector didn't detect the plastic cups says nothing whether or not plastic cups exist on the beach. It's simply a manifestation of the limitations of its detecting powers, right? It's restricted to metal. So too, similarly with science. Yes, it is true that science cannot detect God, or the human rational soul, or angels, or anything immaterial. But just because science can't detect those things doesn't mean those things don't exist. It's simply a manifestation of the limitations of the detecting powers of science. Namely, it's restricted to physical stuff. So this whole idea of scientism, which is the very foundation stone of modern atheism, is flawed. It cannot stand up to the scrutiny of reason. Thus, religious knowledge of God, that is to say, if we can metaphysically demonstrate that God exists and it is true that God exists, that knowledge would be objective knowledge. Knowledge about the real world. And by the way, guess what? We can do it. And I'll spare you the boredom today. Right? Or for some of us, it might be quite fun. I can do that stuff 24/7, but I'll spare you. Okay, finally, what about the Christian skepticism? Remember, Susie's history professor said that we really can't trust the New Testament documents and what they tell us about Jesus. Well, gentlemen, fundamentally, the New Testament documents are by far superior to with regard to their trustworthiness. They are far superior to any other ancient piece of literature. Consider the fact that the apostles wrote in very close temporal proximity to the events that they are recording, according to ancient standards for ancient literature. We know that the early apostles wrote their Gospels anywhere from 30 years to 65 years after the events they're recording. For example, in Acts chapter 28, verses 16 through 31, St. Luke stops the narrative of Paul's 2-year house arrest, which dates to about AD 62. Now, scholars point out that it's unlikely that Luke would not have included in the Acts of the Apostles the result of Paul's house arrest and his appeal to Nero, etc. He just stops the narrative abruptly, which scholars suggest indicates that Luke was writing the narrative while Paul was in house arrest. And he doesn't include Paul's martyrdom or anything after the house arrest because he stopped writing. which means Luke wrote the Acts of the Apostles right around AD 62. And because we know Luke's Gospel was written before the Acts of the Apostles, because the Acts of the Apostles is the sequel to Luke's Gospel, right? That puts Luke's Gospel before AD 62. And because we know that Mark and Matthew wrote their Gospels before Luke's Gospel, we know that Matthew and Mark wrote before Luke, which would be around AD 60, possibly even before. So the time gap between the events that they are recording and the records themselves is anywhere from 30 years to 65 years in the case of John, who wrote about AD 90. Now compare that, gentlemen, to the biographies of Alexander the Great and Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, whose biographies were written right over 400 years after the events they record. Compare that to 30 to 65 years. Which one outweighs the other? Which one is going to be more trustworthy? The New Testament Christian documents, amen? This is just one snippet of how we can respond to Christian skepticism, to show that these early Christian documents are indeed historically trustworthy. And in fact, they are accurate. In fact, we even have non-Christian sources that affirm some of the details that they write about, namely the existence of Jesus himself and various other people and events that take place in the Gospels. So, for example, consider the first century Jewish historian Josephus. He mentions in his writings, he wrote about AD 90. He mentions in his writings Caiaphas the high priest, Annas the high priest, Pontius Pilate, King Herod and his descendants, John the Baptist being killed by Herod, James, the quote-unquote brother of Jesus, and even refers to Jesus as a wise man, a doer of startling deeds, and a figure who was condemned by Pontius Pilate. Thus, the refutation of the claim of those Christians are just biased, there's no non-Christian sources. No, we have non-Christian sources, in this case a Jewish source, affirming many of the details that the apostles have in their Gospels. According to the standards of ancient documents and the historicity of ancient documents, this is gold. Consider also Cornelius Tacitus, a Roman historian of the first century. In his work, The Annals, refers to a group of people called Christians and describes their leader as Christus, the founder of the name, who was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, in the reign of Tiberius. Am I reading the Gospels there? No, I'm reading a first century Roman historian. So, the early apostles wrote in very close temporal proximity to the events they're recording, which for historians is gold when determining the historicity of ancient documents. And we also have non-Christian sources around the same time frame, affirming, validating, corroborating what these early Christians were writing about. Thus, from these facts alone, we can approach the New Testament documents with a hermeneutic of trust, as opposed to a hermeneutic of suspicion. And in general, we can trust what they have to say about what Jesus said and did. So what did Jesus say and do? He basically, gentlemen, said he's God. Before Abraham was, I am, John 8:58. John 10:30-31, I and the Father are one. The Jews picked up stones to kill him. Mark chapter 2, verses 5-10, he tells that paralytic boy, your sins are forgiven. This is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Jesus, reading their hearts, said, in order that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins, I say to you, boy, pick up your mat and go home. Jesus just claimed to have the divine power to forgive sins, and he vindicated that claim by performing a miracle, and ultimately vindicated his claim to be God made flesh by rising from the dead. Which is what the early Christians tell us he did, appearing in glory, having supernatural powers of passing through walls, appearing and disappearing. Which is a taste of what we will experience in the final glorious bodily resurrection at the end of time. So, the challenge, gentlemen, is to be the guardians of faith that we're called to be. To exercise our primordial vocation, to be guardians, protectors, defenders. In particular, guardians, protectors, and defenders of the mind, so that we can protect and guard the heart, to ultimately guard the gift of faith, that precious gift that has been given to us and to our children and our loved ones, initially in the sacrament of baptism. Satan prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for a soul to devour. Yours, your sons, your daughters, your granddaughter, your grandson, your wife. What are you going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? Will you be like Adam and cower as Satan approaches the garden, and let him in? Or will you be like the true Adam, the true man, the true level 4 man, to stand your ground, to look the evil one in the face and say, "Thou shalt not pass"? I leave you once again with St. Paul's words. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 13. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, be strong, and act like men. Level 4 men. Amen? Amen.